I remember the first time I arrived at the cabin. Nestled high in the mountains where the fog clung to the trees like pale silk. The forest was silent, almost too silent, save for the occasional rustle of pine needles underfoot. Inside, the flickering candlelight cast shadows that danced along the rough wooden walls, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and old pine. I sank into a chair by the hearth, my breath mingling with the mist curling through the cracked windows. Every creak of floorboards felt deliberate, as if someone or something was moving just beyond my sight. Outside, the wind hummed a low, mournful tune, carrying whispers I couldn't quite place. I told myself it was the mountains playing tricks, the isolation twisting my thoughts. But then, a soft tapping echoed from the loft above, slow and deliberate, and my chest tightened. That's when I saw it. The fog pressed against the cabin walls. Thick, cold, like it wanted inside. I unpacked slowly, folding shirts, lining up mugs. The wooden floor creaked beneath my fingers, each step hollow. Whispers drifted from the tree lean, not words I knew, just murmurs curling through the mist. The window rattled. A shadow twisted near the corner. It didn't belong to me. The air smelled of burnt wood, not from the fireplace, not from anything I had touched. I pressed my hand to glass. Cold seeped into my bones. The whispers tugged at the edges of my mind. Soft patient calling. I stepped outside. The fog swallowed my legs first, then my breath, then the faint light of the cabin behind me. Trees stood tall and still, but alive. Each trunk seemed to pulse. The wind, it didn't move the leaves. The leaves moved on their own, in rhythm with something beneath the soil. A rustle, subtle, almost polite, led me forward. Soft footsteps, mine or not mine. The forest hummed beneath my feet. A vibration, like the heartbeat of something waiting. I followed. The whispers grew clearer, though still strange. A language I couldn't speak, but I understood. Fear, loneliness, a warning. Branches brushed my arms. Cold sap clung to my skin. The scent of burnt wood thickened. My chest tightened. I could feel it in my teeth. There was silence, too. A pause between breaths, like the forest held its own breath, waiting for me to falter. A shadow moved across the fog. Not a person, not an animal. Something thin, long, watching. I stopped. The hum in the air sharpened. Static prickled on my skin. I wanted to run, but the whispers, they wouldn't let me. I stepped closer to the center of the trees. The fog parted slowly, reluctantly. Shapes emerged, pale in the filtered light, twisting, shifting, unformed, yet real. I tried to speak. My voice barely left a shiver. The shadows answered anyway, not in words. A pulse to recognition. The cold pressed harder. I shivered, my breath fogging in front of me. The forest leaned in. I could hear every leaf, every crack of bark, every silent sigh. I reached for the whispers, for the shape of them, for understanding. They stopped, and all that remained was a low hum. Something beneath the ground, vibrating, waiting. I stepped back. The fog thickened again. The cabin's light faded behind me, a faint heartbeat in the distance. I was alone, and not alone. A faint snapping, like a branch breaking under weight. I spun. Nothing. The fog curled around me, soft and suffocating. I wanted to leave, but my feet stayed rooted. The whispers, now a single thread of sound, pulled at the edges of my mind. The forest exhaled, and I realized in the hum, in the rustle, in the shadowed corners of my eyes, it had been waiting for me. I turned back toward the cabin. The smell of burnt wood lingered in my nose. A cold brush along my arm told me I was being watched. The hum softened, and then silence. I paused at the edge of the fog. The trees stood still, perfectly still, yet I could feel them moving, always moving. I stepped inside. The door clicked shut. The whispers faded, but the hum remained, soft, patient, waiting. The cabin was quiet. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a soft, damp cloth. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine, lingering from the fire I had left burning hours ago. I lit a candle in the main room. Its flame shivered as though it had a pulse. A slow, uneven breath that filled the space around me. Shadows stretched across the walls. Long fingers, leaning into corners, bending in ways that felt wrong. Shapes that were not quite human. I could feel them watching, cold along the back of my neck. I reached out. My fingers brushed the candle's base. The flame wavered. The room exhaled with me. A hollow, slow pull that made the floorboard sigh. I blinked. A faint figure stood at the far wall. Its edges blurred. Pale light outlined it. I couldn't breathe. My voice caught in my throat. The candle flickered again. The shadow leaned, stretching taller. I felt it in my chest. A weight, soft and heavy. That didn't belong. The air smelled faintly of ash. The scent made my stomach tighten. I could hear the faint hum of the cabin, a vibration that hummed through the walls. Soft, constant, insistent. I stepped closer. The floorboards moaned under my weight. The figure did not move, yet I felt it shift. A tilt of the head, almost alive. I tried to steady the candle. The flame danced violently. Every shadow in the room stretched toward me. The figure remained, pale, silent, waiting. The candle's light carved strange patterns into the ceiling. They twisted, curling like smoke. Every corner seemed to lean in, pressing closer. I could feel along my skin, cold fingertips brushing. I swallowed. My mouth was dry. The figure, it was watching me. I could feel eyes, not warm, not human, tracing my every movement. I reached to put the candle down. The flame flared and died. Darkness pooled around the room. The figure remained, pale against the black. The hum deepened, like a pulse beneath the floor, steady and patient. A soft rustle, not the wind, something brushing along the walls. I could smell smoke again, faint, mingling with the damp of the cabin. It smelled like the fire had never really gone out. I wanted to step back. My legs did not obey. The figure's outline shimmered slightly, like heat over pavement. The edges softened, blurred, and yet it remained there, watching, waiting. I blinked. It was gone. The shadows had collapsed back into themselves. The candle sat on the table, untouched, its flame steady, innocent. As if nothing had happened, the room smelled of wax and pine. Silence returned, but I knew it hadn't left. Not really. I sat in the corner, listening, feeling the hum beneath the floor. Every creak, every sigh, every shadowed corner. The candle flickered once more, softly, almost apologetically, and then only silence remained. The wind died suddenly. The cabin sank into a silence so deep it pressed against my ears. Every creak of the wood felt loud, every breath, heavy and deliberate. Then a tapping, soft, irregular, footsteps above me. My heart slowed, then jumped, then slowed again. Impossible rhythm. A pulse out of time of my own. The fog outside thickened. It clung to the trees, bending their branches closer. A pale gray wall, swallowing the edges of the cabin. I stood. No, I sank. Curiosity held me to floor, though every instinct screamed to run. The tapping continued. One step, then pause. Then two, light as breath, shifting across the roof. The boards whispered beneath each ghostly weight. I pressed my hand against the wall. Cold seeped into my skin. The air smelled faintly of damp pine and old wood. Something else lingered just beyond my reach. The shadows stretched in the corners. Long, thin, leaning toward me. They didn't move like human shadows. They moved with intention. I could feel the hum beneath the floor again. Soft, patient, like it had been waiting for this moment. The tapping slowed. A single step deliberate. Then nothing. I held my breath. The fog shifted outside. The trees leaned farther, as if listening. The cabin seemed to exhale, tiny shivers running along the walls. Another step, closer this time. The boards groaned under weight I could not see. I imagined a figure, pale, stretching across the roof. The cold air brushed my neck. A whisper of movement through the silence. I wanted to call out. My voice caught in my throat. My lips parted, but no sound came. The tapping continued, then stopped abruptly. I listened. The hum beneath the floor, steady. A faint rustle above, like fabric brushing the shingles. The fog pressed harder against the windows, thick and wet. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean inward, watching. I stepped toward the corner. My fingers grazed a wall. The cold lingered, sticky and strange. Outside, the trees were statues, but their branches twitched at the edges of my vision. The tapping started again, this time deliberate, walking in a slow circle. Around the roof, around the cabin, around me. I sank to the floor. The air smelled faintly of smoke, not from the fireplace, but from something lingering just beyond the roofline. The hum deepened, a vibration under my feet, low and insistent. I didn't move. I couldn't. The footsteps paused directly above me. Then a shift, a scrape against shingles. The fog outside swirled, curling around the corners of the cabin. Silence returned, except for the hum beneath the floor. My chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, trying to match its rhythm. I finally dared to look up. The ceiling was empty. No figure. No shadow moving. Only the candle flickered. Soft, tentative, as if unsure it should exist. The fog pressed tight against the walls, thick and wet. I stayed there for a long time, listening, feeling the cabin breathe around me, feeling the hum beneath my feet, knowing the footsteps had been real. And though nothing moved above, I knew they were still there, waiting, soft, patient. The attic smelled of dust and dry wood. Faded sunlight filtered through a small, grimy window. It made the air feel heavy, almost golden, almost suffocating. I found it tucked under a tarp. A mirror, old, dusty, forgotten. Its surface hummed faintly in the dim light, like it was breathing beneath the glass. I wiped the dust with the sleeve of my shirt. The reflection wavered, like smoke curling over fire. Slow, soft, gentle, but wrong. I leaned closer. My reflection blinked, not when I did. A smile stretched across its face. Slow, deliberate, curving in a way my lips did not. I stepped back. The attic felt smaller suddenly. The walls leaned in. The air pressed against my skin, warm and tight. The tarp rustled. I hadn't touched it. The mirror's surface shimmered, catching the faint sunlight in streaks. Shadows twisted in the corners. I swallowed. The smell of old wood and dust filled my nose, heavy and suffocating. The hum beneath the floor, or was it the mirror, vibrated faintly in my chest. I blinked. The reflection moved again. A slow tilt of the head. My own face, yet not mine. Eyes darker. Watching. Waiting. I reached out. Fingers trembled. The glass was cold. Colder than air. Colder than fear should feel. The reflection's hand hovered for a moment, then rested when I pulled mine back. The attic shifted. The floor creaked beneath my weight. The air smelled faintly of smoke, like something had burned decades ago. Left to linger. The mirror fogged slightly, and the waver became sharper. I leaned closer again. It smiled. I didn't. A shadow flickered behind me. The corners of the attic stretched. The air pressed harder. Soft footsteps, imagined or not, whispered across the boards. I could feel static in the air, a vibration that pulsed with the mirror's light. My reflection didn't just mimic me anymore. It existed beside me. I stepped back once more. The attic seemed to breathe with me, walls exhaling, floorboards sighing. Even the dust stirred. The mirror shimmered again, smoke like curling, twisting. My reflection paused, blinked, and then it smiled slowly, waiting for me to look away. I let my eyes drop. The attic felt impossibly small. I could feel the corners leaning, pressing, waiting. The hum remained. I placed the tarp back carefully, the mirror hidden, yet I could feel it through the layers of dust and fabric. Waiting, alive. I left the attic. The stair creaked beneath me. The air smelled faintly of wood and smoke. The cabin exhaled softly behind me. I did not look back, but I could still see in my mind the reflection, smiling, alone yet not. Night fell. The forest wrapped itself in a blanket of fog. The air smelled damp, mossy. with a faint hint of smoke from the cabin. The hum began, low, deep, vibrating in my chest. I felt it before I heard it, a pulse through the soil, through my bones. I followed it. Each step sank into cold, wet soil. Fog clung to my legs, curling around my ankles. Every breath I drew tasted of earth and wet leaves. Shadows slid between trees, slow, fluid, watching but not quite human. They kept pace, drifting along the fog-draped path. The humming shifted, soft now, almost melodic, like a lullaby I could not remember, yet recognized. It tugged at the edges of my mind, gentle but insistent. My hands brushed against wet bark, cold, sticky with sap. The forest smelled alive. Every leaf, every branch seemed to lean closer. The hum rose in tone, winding around me, curling into my chest. I wanted to stop. I wanted to flee. My legs did not obey. They moved on their own, carrying me deeper. The shadows lengthened. They swayed slightly, like reeds in water. The fog thickened, softening the shapes but sharpening the feeling. Alone, yet followed. I paused. The hum became a song, small notes threading through the trees. I could feel it under my skin, vibrating in my fingertips. Breath caught in my throat. Something rustled behind me. Not wind, not animal. A subtle shift in the fog. Soft footsteps, echoing my own, yet never quite aligned. I leaned closer to the path. The trees bent toward me, branches brushing my face. The cold clung to my cheeks, wet and sharp. The hum pulsed again. Steady, insistent, mesmerizing. Shadows darted. A movement, subtle, at the edge of my vision, slipping between trees, keeping pace, folding into the fog. The melody of the hum wrapped tighter around my chest. I wanted to resist, but the forest pulled me forward. The earth soft beneath my feet, breathing, alive. Each step a note in the song I could not leave behind. The fog thinned slightly. Pale light spilled from the moon above, faint and distant. It caught on damp leaves, reflecting, shimmering. The hum softened, curling into silence. I stopped. The shadows vanished. The path before me lay empty. Only the soft, wet smell of earth remained, and a lingering vibration in my chest, faint but undeniable. I turned back toward the cabin. The fog seemed thicker there. Trees leaned in closer. The forest exhaled around me, patient, quiet, waiting. The hum faded completely, but I could feel it still, soft, persistent, beneath the soil, beneath the air, beneath me. I reached the cabin door. Cold wood under my hand. The cabin exhaled softly. The night whispered, and I knew the forest had not let me go. The night was thick, cold pressed against the cabin walls. Fog rolled in, clinging to the glass like damp fingers. A rustling came from outside the window. Slow, deliberate, measured, like something pacing just beyond reach. I pressed my face to the glass. Fog for my breath. The chill seeped into my skin, through my shirt, down to my bones. Shapes flickered in the dim light. Too human to be branches, too tall to be animals. They lingered, leaning, stretching, moving in ways the world should not allow. The air thickened, heavy, almost liquid. Each inhale pulled damp fog and the faint smell of earth into my lungs. The silence around me became unbearable. I wanted to pull back. I wanted to run. But my fingers gripped the window, cold and trembling. My breath hung in the air, misting, a tiny ghost I could see but not touch. The shapes moved closer, not directly, but circling, swaying with the rhythm of my heartbeat. Branches shifted, shadows curling in strange angles, elongating toward me. A soft scrape on the siding. The wood under the window groaned, bending with invisible weight. The fog shifted with it, swirling, thickening, pressing against the glass. I could feel my pulse in my ears. The hum of the cabin floor beneath my feet vibrated faintly. The air tasted of damp pine, smoke, and something else metallic, faint wrong. I stepped back from the window. Shadows flickered behind me, thrown by the pale moonlight. I pressed my palms to my face. Cold sweat mingled with the chill of the room. The rustling paused. Complete silence. A heartbeat suspended, echoing in my chest. Then movement again. Closer, measured, patient. I inched toward the door. Every step creaked, echoing too loud. The shapes outside swayed. Soft, deliberate, waiting. The fog crawled along the window frame, curling around the sill. I could smell the earth rising from the ground. Cold, wet, alive. The hum beneath the floor throbbed in rhythm with my chest. The cabin felt smaller, breathing against me. The shadows stretched one last time. A flicker of movement across the fog. Then stillness. The rustling faded. I pressed my hand to the glass again. The fog lingered. The cold lingered. The shapes were gone, or they had hidden just beyond the fog's edge. I exhaled slowly. The air tasted metallic. My breath condensed on the window, fogging it once more. The silence pressed in again. Thick, quiet, waiting. I stepped back. The cabin exhaled softly around me. Every shadow leaned. Every floorboard sighed. The night outside remained alive and patient, and I knew it would return. The rustling, the shapes, the cold pressing against the glass. Always waiting. Morning arrived pale and slow. The fog had lifted, but the air remained cold, sharp with frost. I stepped outside. Footprints circled the cabin. Fresh, perfectly formed. Too large to be mine. I remembered the forest last night. Empty, silent. Yet now, the snow told a different story. I knelt, letting my fingers brush the cold powder. The footprints pressed deep, edges crisp. Every step echoed in my mind, soft whispers threading through my thoughts. They vanished halfway up the slope, into thin air. No drag marks, no broken branches, nothing, just silence. I followed the trail. The cold crunch underfoot, brittle and biting. Each step carried the soft hum of snow settling, tiny shifts like hushed voices. The air smelled of frost and pine. Sharp, clean, but under it, something faintly metallic, lingering. My breath came in soft clouds, vanishing before me. The footprints curved, around trees, between boulders. Every turn precise, deliberate, impossible. Shadows from the rising sun stretched long. The snow glittered, pale light bouncing off every flake. Yet the shapes of the forest seemed wrong. Branches leaned closer. The wind whispered faintly, almost guiding me forward. I paused, fingers grazing a snow-laden branch. The hum beneath the snow, subtle, vibrating, filled my chest. The footprints waited silently ahead, patient and impossible. I imagined what had made them. Something tall, something aware. Yet the air remained still. The forest held its breath, watching, waiting. I followed the trail further, each step sinking deeper. The snow cold against my boots, sharp against my skin. The footprints ended abruptly, as though lifted by unseen hands. I knelt, studying the final print. Edges crisp, immaculate, the snow beneath untouched, unbroken, yet the trail was gone. I shivered. The forest exhaled softly around me. The hum underfoot faded. The crisp air lingered, smelling faintly of frost and something old. I turned back toward the cabin. The footprints remained in my mind, circling endlessly. The pale light fell across the roof. The forest seemed to lean in again, quiet, patient. And I knew whatever had left them was still there, just beyond sight, waiting. The cabin was quiet. Morning light had faded, leaving pale shadows across the floorboards. The air smelled faintly with smoke and cold metal. A door at the far end groaned open on its own. The hinges squealed. A sound like a faint human scream, stretched thin and hollow. I froze. The room beyond remained dark, still, yet I felt eyes on me. Not human eyes, or at least not entirely. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. Cold metal pressed against my palm. Time seemed to pause. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, warm and damp. Shadows pulled around the edges of the storage room. They leaned, stretched, shifting ever so slightly. The smell of dust and old wood mixed with something faintly metallic. A quiet hum threaded beneath the floorboards, vibrating softly in my chest. I swallowed, my breath fog in front of me, brief, visible. The door seemed alive, breathing with slow, deliberate exhalations. I leaned closer. The darkness behind the threshold felt dense, alive. Every sense sharpened. The cold brush in my arms, the faint scent of decay, the low hum that matched the trembling of my heart. The hinges squealed again. A sharp note, like a whisper pain. I felt it in my teeth. A shiver ran along my spine. My hand hovered over the knob. The air shifted slightly, almost like a pulse. I imagined the darkness moving inside, shaping itself just beyond vision. Soft footsteps, careful, brushing against unseen surfaces. I blinked. The shadows seemed to retreat slightly, then stretch back. The room exhaled again, slow and patient. The hum beneath the floor deepened, vibrating in sync with my own heartbeat. I pressed my palm to the door. Cold, hard, solid. The metal seemed to thrum faintly under my touch. The dark beyond remained motionless, yet alive. I stepped back slightly. The hinges groaned, the sound lingering in the cold air. The room smelled faintly of damp cloth and old wood. Every shadow leaned, stretching toward me, patient, waiting. I forced myself to breathe. The door hung open, a thin crack of darkness. The cabin exhaled softly around me. Even the floorboards sighed. I pulled my hand away. The metal remained cold. The dark remained still. And I knew. Time resumed. Slowly. The air settled, but the sense of being watched lingered. The door remained patient, waiting. The cabin was quiet. The fire in the hearth cracked, sending pale light across the room. The air smelled of smoke, cold ash, and something faintly damp. I returned to the hearth, and there it was, a shadow, seated where no one could have been. It mimicked my posture, every subtle tilt, every careful shift. Yet it moved independently, slowly, deliberately, stretching long arms toward the ceiling. The firelight warped its form. Edges flickered, stretching and curling like smoke caught in a draft. It wasn't solid, not entirely. I knelt, watching. The floor beneath my knees creaked softly. The air felt thick, sticky, pressing against my chest. The shadow's movements were calm, patient, and impossible. I could smell faint wood smoke, warm, mixed with something colder, almost metallic. A hum threaded beneath the floor, vibrating in my chest. The shadow leaned slightly, stretching again, but its motion was fluid, unnatural. I exhaled slowly. My breath misted in the cool air. The shadow's head tilted, mimicking mine. Yet its eyes, if they could be called that, were empty. I tried to shift my posture. It matched. A whisper movement, long fingers brushing the ceiling boards. The firelight flickered, elongating the shadow, bending it further. I pressed my hands against the floor. Cold seeped into my palms. The hum beneath me deepened. I could feel it vibrating in my ribs, a steady, slow pulse. The shadow moved again, not violently, softly, patiently. It curled along the floor, then rose, stretching taller. Its edges shimmered, like heat over black ice. I stepped back. The cabin seemed smaller, pressing in around me. Every shadow leaned. Every corner softened and darkened. The hearth flickered, flames dancing across the polished wood, warping the shadow's shape. I sat, careful not to breathe too loudly. Its arms retracted slowly, then stretched again, watching, mimicking, yet entirely separate. I could feel the air around me tighten, static, almost alive, brushing my skin, rustling my hair. The smell of smoke lingered, mixed with a cold, faint tang of iron. Time seemed to slow. The shadow remained patient, quiet, stretching and curling with the firelight. I realized it wasn't waiting. It simply existed. I finally dared to exhale fully. The firelight warmed my face. The shadow leaned back, folding against the floor, but its edges still shimmered. Soft, patient, alive in a way the cabin itself could not be. I stepped back slowly. The hum beneath the floor faded slightly. The air relaxed, but the shadow remained, mimicking, waiting. The cabin was still, yet it breathed, a slow, gentle sigh, as if inhaling and exhaling with me. Floorboards lifted softly beneath my feet, then fell again, mimicking the rhythm of a heartbeat. Steady, patient, unseen, every object seemed aware. The chairs leaned slightly. The lamps tilted, catching pale light just so. The shelves bent imperceptibly, drawing my eyes, pulling attention like invisible eyes. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The air smelled faintly of wood and cold smoke, warm beneath my skin. Every breath I took mingled with the cabin's own, slow and deliberate. The walls sighed again, a soft exhalation that pressed against my ears, against my chest. The hum beneath the floor pulsed gently, like a hidden pulse I could feel, but not see. Shadows shifted across the corners of the room, slow curling, brushing the ceiling and floor. They moved with the cabin, leaning, folding, breathing with me, alone yet surrounded by motion. I reached a hand toward the nightstand. It trembled. The lamp tilted toward my fingers. The surface beneath my palm felt warmer than before, almost alive, breathing beneath my touch. I exhaled slowly. The air smelled faintly of pine and damp wood. The walls pressed inward subtly, tilting, bending with the rhythm of the floor beneath me. I felt the cabin alive, patient, aware of every small movement I made. The bed creaked softly beneath me. It rose, then fell, in sync with the floorboards. Every object leaned. Every shadow shifted. The room exhaled. I lay still, listening, feeling the slow hum threading beneath the walls, the floor, the very air. The ceiling pulsed above me. The house breathed. I could feel it in my chest, in my arms, even in my fingertips. Patient, quiet, alive. The air thickened slightly. Cold brushed my face. The hum pulsed softly. The shadows leaned in closer. Every object seemed to wait. I closed my eyes. The cabin exhaled softly around me. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, all breathing, all patient. Even alone, I was not alone. And the house continued to breathe. Slowly, steady, unseen, alive. Fog rolled in again. Thick, almost tactile, curling around the cabin like wet fingers. The air smelled of damp pine and cold earth, heavy and quiet. Flickers of movement appeared, darting between the trees. Sometimes human, sometimes not. Edges blurred, shapes melting into the fog. I blinked. They vanished, gone, leaving only the lingering hum of uncertainty threading through the forest. The ground beneath my boots was soft, cold, settling with every step. Branches brushed my arms. The fog clung to my hair, damp and cool. I stopped. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind was still. Soft whispers ran along the edge of my hearing. Shadows shifted, flickering at the corners of my vision. A branch moved, a figure, then gone. The hum beneath the trees pulsed faintly, through the soles of my boots, into my chest. A rhythm I could not name, alone yet followed. I leaned closer to a tree, fingers brushing bark, rough and damp. The fog curled around my hands, cool, sticky. The shapes moved again, just beyond reach. I exhaled slowly, breath mixing with mist. The forest smelled alive. Something old, patient, waiting just beyond the pale light. I took another step. Soft, careful. The fog shifted with me, curling between my legs, brushing my skin. Shadows flickered, then disappeared. The hum lingered, faint, insistent, vibrating in my chest. I could feel it threading through the trees, through the mist, through the ground beneath me. I stopped again. The fog thickened. Every branch leaned slightly. Every shadow stretched just beyond sight. The forest held its secrets, patient, silent. I turned back toward the cabin. The flickers remained in my mind, moving just beyond the fog. Waiting, watching. Even alone, I was not alone. The hum followed me, soft, persistent, through the fog, through the trees, threading the cold air. I stepped inside. The cabin welcomed me with quiet warmth. The fog pressed against the windows, still. The shapes vanished, or hid. The hum remained, quiet, insistent, and I knew the forest had not let go. Fog pressed thick against the trees. The air smelled damp, of moss and frost, cold on my cheeks. Each breath I drew hung visible, misting before me. Through a gap in the fog, I glimpsed it, a figure, pale as moonlight. It stood perfectly still. The snow and mist softened its edges. Yet it was aware. I froze, heart hammering, every nerve alert, every muscle tense. The wind held its breath, its gaze. I could feel it. Quiet, patient, waiting. Time seemed to stretch, slow bend. I blinked. The figure vanished. No step, no sound. Only the fog swirled softly where it had been. My skin prickled. Cold ran along my neck, down my arms. The forest exhaled. Shadows shifted, long and slow, brushing the ground. I stepped forward cautiously. Snow crunched underfoot. The smell of damp pine and frost mingled with something faintly metallic. The fog shifted. Whispers of movement teased the edge of my hearing. I imagined it just beyond sight, patient, waiting. The trees leaned inward. Branches brushed my arms, cold and soft. The air pressed gently, like the weight of unseen eyes. I stopped. The forest hummed faintly beneath the snow, the fog, the silence. The figure did not return, yet its presence lingered. I turned slowly. The mist swirled in pale currents. Shadows stretched, then recoiled. The gap where I had seen it remained empty, yet charged. I drew my hands across my arms. The chill stuck to my skin. Every breath I exhaled mingled with the fog. The forest was alive, patient, observant. I stepped back toward the cabin. The snow whispered beneath my boots. The fog clung, shifting softly, hiding, revealing. Even gone, the figure's absence pressed against me. Silent, cold, impossible. A reminder of something just beyond reach. I reached the cabin door. The warmth inside felt immediate, protective, yet the fog pressed against the windows. The pale figure remained in my mind, and I knew it had not left. It waited, quietly, patiently, beneath the fog, beneath the trees. The sky darkened suddenly. Rain began, sharp and stinging, hammering against the roof. The windows rattled with each gust of wind, shaking loose a soft sigh from the cabin. I sat inside, candlelight flickering. Shadows deepened in the corners of the room, folding, stretching. The air smelled of wet wood and cold stone, thick and pressing. The storm outside mirrored something inside me, a slow, tightening unease, a hum threading through the floorboards, vibrating gently beneath my boots. I watched the rain cascade down the windows, blurring the world outside. Every branch shuddered under the wind. Every tree leaned as if straining against invisible hands. The candle flickered. Its pale light danced across the walls. Shadows moved, independent yet tethered to the flame. I could almost feel them watching. I drew my hands across my arms. Cold brushed my skin, mixing with warmth from the candle. The cabin exhaled softly around me, creaking gently. The hum beneath the floor pulsed with each breath I took. Raindrops struck the roof like needles, a rhythm sharp, insistent, pressing against my chest. I could smell the damp pine outside, sharp and bitter. I leaned closer to the firelight. Shadows twisted slowly, stretching along the walls. They seemed to move with a mind of their own. Even the air felt alive, shifting, dense, brushing my skin. I exhaled slowly. The storm hummed with the same pulse as my own heartbeat. Every object in the cabin leaned slightly, tilting as if aware of me. Every shadow deepened, reaching toward the corners, patient. I closed my eyes briefly. The wind rattled against the windows. The rain hissed on the roof. Even alone, I could feel the storm pressing, pushing. The candle flickered again. Shadows stretched further, curling across the floorboards. The hum beneath my feet deepened slightly, steady and impossible. I opened my eyes. The storm raged outside. Inside, every shadow, every object seemed aware, waiting. The cabin breathed with me, echoing the storm. I sat still. The candle flame trembled. The rain lashed the windows. The wind pulled at the eaves. And I felt the quiet weight of the storm mirrored in my chest. The storm would pass. The cabin would calm. But the shadows, the hum, the unease, they would remain. Fog clung to the ground, thick and heavy. The forest smelled of wet pine and cold soil, sharp in the still air. Each breath I drew hung visible, misting before me. A laugh echoed from the woods. Hollow, childlike, yet impossibly cold. I froze. The air seemed to tighten around my chest. Every nerve stretched, alert. The hum beneath the trees thrummed faintly, steady. I traced the sound, stepping carefully through fog. Snow and leaves crunched softly underfoot. The mist brushed my arms. Damp and clinging, the treeline drew closer. Shadows stretched between the trunks. The laugh came again, echoing, folding it on itself. Yet no figure appeared. Silence returned dense, pressing. The fog shifted, curling around my legs and boots. The smell of damp pine thickened, sharp and biting. I stepped back toward the cabin. Each step felt heavier than the last. The cold pressed against my skin, the wind brushing my face, teasing, almost alive. Shadows flickered in the mist. I imagined shapes just beyond the trees, patient, waiting. The hum beneath the ground persisted, low and insistent. The laugh echoed one final time. Then nothing. Only fog, only silence, only the weight of the forest around me. I reached the cabin door. The warmth inside greeted me, soft and comforting. The fog pressed against the windows, still hiding the woods. Even inside, the echo of that laugh lingered, cold and hollow, a reminder that the forest had not released me, and that something had been there, watching. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. The air smelled faintly of cold wood and dust, still and heavy. A gust of icy air swept past me, sharp, as if something exhaled just behind my back. I spun around. Empty. Nothing moved, yet the chill lingered, brushing my skin, crawling up my neck. The hairs on my arms rose. A shiver ran through me, slow and deliberate. The house seemed to respond. Floorboards groaned softly beneath my weight. The walls whispered faintly, like breath through cracks. I stepped forward cautiously. The cold brushed my hands along the railing. Shadows shifted along the walls, pale, stretching, folding. The hallway pulsed with a subtle hum, not mechanical, not entirely natural. It throbbed faintly, like the house itself had a heartbeat. I held my breath. The air tasted faintly metallic, sharp, lingering. Every instinct told me to run, but my feet remained rooted to the boards beneath me. The gust returned, colder this time. It slid along my spine, curling in my chest. The shadows leaned closer. The hum deepened, threading through the floor into my bones. I exhaled slowly. The corridor seemed longer than it had a moment ago. The walls leaned subtly, tilting inward, patient, aware. Soft footsteps echoed behind me, but vanished when I turned. The air pressed against my cheeks. A faint whisper lingered at the edge of hearing. Not a voice I could name, not a word I could place. I reached the end of the hall. The doorframe shivered lightly. The candlelight from the room beyond flickered, casting long shadows that moved like smoke. I paused. The house sighed, slow and deliberate. The cold pressed inward. I could feel it in my chest, my arms, even my fingertips. The corridor held its silence. The chill remained. I stepped back slowly, breath visible in the cold air. Each movement careful, measured. The gust passed. The hallway exhaled. Yet the hum persisted, low and patient. I was alone, but not untouched. The house seemed to watch, waiting. The cold lingered, curling softly along the walls, along the floor. And I knew the breath had not come from me. Above me, the loft door creaked slowly. A subtle shift in the air followed, soft and deliberate. The smell of aged wood and dust drifted down, mingling with the cold draft. I could see nothing beyond the doorway, only shadows shifting, curling, folding into one another. The faint hum of the house threaded through the silence, steady, patient. A soft tapping began, rhythmic, deliberate, like fingers brushing lightly against the floorboards. I held my breath. The air pressed closer, damp and cool. Every nerve stretched, waiting, listening. Curiosity edged over fear. I stepped forward. The floor creaked beneath me, echoing up into the loft. The shadows swayed as if aware, pulling themselves toward the open doorway. The tapping continued, soft but insistent. It seemed to follow the rhythm of my own heartbeat. The loft smelled faintly of smoke and cold timber, heavy and close. I reached the base of the stairs. The candlelight flickered against the walls. Shadows twisted upward, reaching, receding. A faint static seemed to cling to the edges of my vision. The loft door shifted slightly, responding to the draft or something more. I could feel it, the space beyond the door alive, waiting. I inhaled slowly. The tapping paused for a heartbeat. The air felt thick, pressing against my chest. A whisper of movement brushed along the walls, soft and deliberate. I stepped closer. The wood beneath my feet groaned softly. The candle trembled in its holder, pale light spilling along the floor. The loft door creaked again, widening imperceptibly. The tapping resumed, rhythmic, insistent, a patient, slow cadence that drew me forward. I paused at the foot of the stairs. The loft loomed above, shadows pooling and shifting within. The air smelled faintly of damp pine and something metallic, sharp. Every instinct told me to stop, to retreat, to vanish. But curiosity held me. Soft footsteps, mine and nothing else, carried me closer. The tapping matched each step, echoing softly through the ceiling beams. I stopped beneath the door. The shadows hung like smoke, thick and curling. The hum beneath the floor pulsed faintly, threading through my chest. I could feel it waiting, patient, aware. The loft door trembled once more. A faint sigh of wood, like breath, escaped the hinges. I stepped back slowly, heart slow, then quickening, feeling the air shift around me, heavy, alive. I stayed at the bottom of the stairs. The tapping continued, steady, quiet, almost hypnotic. The shadows above remained just out of reach, and I knew the loft waited, waiting for someone to notice, waiting in silence, waiting in shadow. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight. A faint smell of old wood and rust lingered in the air. Something caught my eye, a small, glinting object tucked under a loose board. I lifted it gently. A rusted key, cold, rough against my fingers, and heavier than it looked. I traced it with my thumb. The metal felt ancient. Time seemed to gather around it, silent, expectant. The key fit a drawer I had never opened. Its handle was worn, smooth from years of neglect. I hesitated, feeling the quiet stretch around me, thick and almost solid. Inside, a note lay flat against the wood. Faded ink spelled out, "Don't look behind you." The words hung in the air. The silence that followed pressed against my ears. It was heavier than any noise I had heard in this house. The air smelled faintly metallic, sharp and cold. A static hum vibrated through the floorboards beneath me. I could feel in my chest, low and patient. I held the note. The edges trembled under my fingers. The candlelight flickered, shadows leaping across the walls. I swallowed. The house seemed to breathe around me. Floorboards groaned softly. The walls whispered faintly, almost inaudible. I wanted to look behind me. Curiosity pressed, soft but relentless. Every instinct warned me. Every sense screamed. The hum under the boards pulsed gently, rhythmic. The air curled along my arms, brushing damp against my skin. A faint rustling came from the hallway. I stayed still. The note remained in my hand, its warning heavy. The shadows leaned closer, pale and restless. I exhaled slowly. The quiet held me, patient, waiting. No footsteps came. No whisper answered. Only the lingering tension of knowing someone, or something, watched. I placed the note carefully back in the drawer. The key weighed against my palm, solid and unforgiving. The drawer closed with a faint sigh, as if the house exhaled with it. The silence returned, denser this time, more aware. The candle flickered once, then steadied, casting long shadows that stretched toward the corners of the room. I moved away slowly. Every step soft, measured, careful. The key stayed in my hand, its cold metal pressed against my skin, constant and insistent. The quiet held me, lingering, and I knew it would remain, even after I left the room. Frost clung to the window pane, delicate and cold against my fingertips. The The night outside lay thick with fog, muted and heavy. I leaned closer, breath misting the glass. A pair of eyes stared back. Not human, yet something about them felt familiar, almost sad. The fog thickened, curling and folding around the edges of the window. The eyes remained lingering, watching. I felt their gaze press against my chest, quiet but insistent. The air smelled faintly of wet pine and cold stone. The hum of the house threaded beneath my ears, slow and steady. I held my breath, waiting, feeling the silence expand. I could hear the faint rustle of trees outside, branches scraping lightly against the cabin walls, or perhaps something else moving just beyond the fog. The eyes blinked, or maybe I blinked first. Either way, when I looked again, they were still there, patient and observing. A chill brushed my neck, soft, deliberate. The window trembled slightly beneath my touch. The frost shimmered in the pale moonlight, fragile and shifting. I pressed my hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep through, a silent weight pressing back from the other side. The fog drifted, thick and tactile, wrapping the trees, the ground, the cabin in its quiet embrace. The eyes faded slightly, then reappeared closer, watching. I stepped back, heart slow and then quickening. The candle trembled in its holder, casting long, wavering shadows across the floor. I wanted to move away, to look elsewhere, but the weight of the gaze held me in place. The silence around the room became denser, thick with the knowledge that something waited, unseen. Every instinct told me the eyes weren't just reflections. They were aware, patient. Still, I exhaled slowly, feeling the cold air curl along my spine. The window remained quiet but alive, frost shifting faintly under the unseen presence. I stepped back, feeling the floorboards hum beneath my weight. The candlelight steadied, shadows shrinking into the corners. The fog outside rolled heavier, curling around the trees, and the eyes vanished as silently as they appeared. Yet the feeling lingered, cold, patient, watching. And I knew, even in their absence, that the gaze remained. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet. Each creak stretched, long and uneven, echoing in the quiet cabin. The air smelled faintly of pine and old varnish, tinged with something warmer, like breath pressed into wood. I stepped cautiously. A pattern formed beneath my feet, impossible shapes, twisting and folding in ways that made no sense. I froze. The shapes shifted with me as if alive. A dark vein of fear threaded through the stillness. The candle flickered, pale light bouncing off the walls. Shadows lengthened, curving along the floor like smoke. I could feel the hum of the house under boards, subtle, insistent. Every step I took altered the patterns. They spiraled, stretched, contracted, always ahead of me. A rhythm I couldn't follow, yet I couldn't look away. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and warm in contrast to the cold floor. I leaned closer, fingertips brushing the wood, rough, uneven, yet almost soft beneath my touch. A faint rustling came from the hallway, or perhaps it was the boards themselves, breathing, shifting. I held my breath. The shapes followed my steps, circling, pulling my gaze into their impossible geometry. A sense of being watched prickled along my neck. Silent, patient, unyielding. I moved slowly, deliberate. The floor hummed, a quiet vibration against my soles. Every motion made the patterns twist further, as if the house knew my intent before I did. I paused. The candle trembled in its holder. Shadows writhed in response, stretching toward me in long, thin fingers. I felt the wood shift under me again, heavier, deliberate. I could smell the faint tang of metal, old nails, perhaps, mixed with the warmth of the house itself. It pressed in, close, almost tangible. The patterns underfoot coiled tighter, pulling my attention, refusing release. I took another step. The floorboards moaned, shapes folding around me. A subtle draft brushed the back of my neck, cold and deliberate. I could feel it, though nothing moved. The hum beneath the boards slowed, then quickened again, a heartbeat out of sync with my own. I watched the patterns, shifting, uncatchable, alive. I stopped entirely. The room held its breath with me. The candle's flame steadied, shadows frozen in place. The floorboards whispered beneath my weight, patterns waiting, watching, patient. I knew they would follow every step, every shift, every breath. And in that quiet, I understood. This house, every board, every shadow, it was aware. I stepped back slowly. The patterns shifted again, trailing where I had been. The hum faded into silence, leaving only the soft, insistent echo of movement beneath the wood. I didn't move for a long moment. The candlelight hummed softly around the room, casting pale fingers over the walls. And the floor remained alive, waiting. The cabin felt smaller tonight. Walls pressed closer, heavier. A faint metallic tang drifted in the air, sharp against the warmth of the candle. I sensed it before I saw it, just beyond perception, moving in the spaces I couldn't name. A presence folding around me, pressing against my skin. I turned. Nothing. The shadows stretched toward the corners, pale light curling around them. The floor beneath my feet hummed softly, as if aware of the weight of the air. Every breath I took seemed to thicken it, dense, unyielding, alive. I could feel in the chill that brushed my neck, a whisper of cold, moving just behind me. Static rose along my skin, hair prickling, heart slowing and speeding all at once. The candle shivered. Flame bent in shapes that weren't natural, throwing shadows that lingered too long. I reached to steady it, hand trembling. The air shifted in response, subtle, deliberate. A faint pressure, like exhale breath, pressed against my chest. I moved cautiously through the room, soft steps on the worn boards, yet each step echoed louder than it should. Something followed, tracing, waiting unseen. The metallic scent grew sharper, clinging to my clothes, my hair. It was close, close enough to taste, close enough to feel its patience. I stopped. The candlelight flickered across walls, and in that pale glow, the corners seemed to lean toward me, silent, still, watching. I spun slowly, expecting to see something, anything, but the room remained empty, filled only with a hum of quiet tension. The presence shifted again, weightless, yet heavy against my skin, a soft vibration, a static in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. I whispered my own name, a fragile sound swallowed instantly by the cabin. The air tightened, and the metallic tang lingered, a reminder that it had never left. I sank into a chair near the window, pale light reflecting on glass damp with fog. The world outside blurred, twisted by shadow and mist. And yet the feeling remained, a constant pulse just beyond sight, watching, waiting, patient. I didn't move for a long time. The presence hovered at the edge of perception, unseen but undeniably near. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat told me it was aware. I felt my own weight settle into the floor, chair creaking softly under me. The air slowly thinned, yet the metallic scent lingered, a reminder of what hovered just out of reach. I exhaled. Time felt stretched, elongated, measured by the pulse of the unseen. The cabin remained alive, and so did it. I sat in quiet, listening to hum of the house, to the soft vibration in the air and the faint, insistent trace of something I could never name. It waited. I waited. And the night went on. The staircase waited. Dark wood, slick from years of neglect, curling upward into shadow. Each step hummed softly under my weight, stretching time thin. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold pine. I lifted my foot. A shadow moved in the corner of my eye, flickering, long, unnatural. I took the first step. It groaned beneath me. The light from below warped, stretching the walls like they were breathing. A faint static clung to the air. I could feel it on my skin, like tiny shocks against my arms. The shadows flickered again, and I realized they weren't just on the wall. They moved with me, ahead and behind, pulling at my mind in two directions at once. I held the railing, cold, rough with biting my fingers. The stairway seemed longer than it should be, each step a small eternity. The hum of the house resonated in my chest. I paused. A shiver traveled along the floorboards, and the air thickened, heavy with something unseen. I could hear my own breath, but not just mine. Something else, small, distant, brushing past edges of hearing. Step by step, I climbed. Shadows stretched, twisting into impossible angles, reaching upward, downward, around me. I felt weight above me, weight below me, and a tug in the hollow between my ribs. The railing pulsed under my touch, like it had its own heartbeat. The staircase seemed aware of my hesitation, shaping itself in rhythm with my fear. I looked up. The shadows writhed, flickering across the ceiling in patterns I couldn't name. A cold breeze drifted down, carrying the scent of metal and smoke, and the wood beneath my feet shivered as though it breathed. I hesitated. The space above seemed endless, the space below deep and hollow. I could not decide which direction held safety. Every instinct told me to stop. Every whisper thought urged me onward. Step, another, each one echoing, long and stretched, filling the air with soft creaks, whispers of movement, and the faint static of something awake. The shadows flickered again, this time longer, deliberate, shaping into forms that almost resembled limbs, almost like faces. I shivered. The hair on my arms rose, and I felt my chest tighten with the weight of being observed. I reached the midpoint. The staircase seemed to sway slightly beneath me. The wood hummed softly, vibrating through my shoes, and I realized the flickering light wasn't just from below. It followed me. A pause. I could hear the faint scrape of something moving just beyond sight, slipping along the walls, brushing the air, cold and damp against my skin. I swallowed, and the taste of rust and fog lingered on my tongue. Step. The next. Upward and downward, a dual pull, a tugging unease that stretched time around me. I could not tell where I had started or where I would end. At last, I reached the top. Shadows clung to the ceiling and walls, stretching one last time before falling still. The hum faded into silence, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. I stood alone, the staircase behind me quiet, the candlelight pale and shivering, and though nothing moved, I felt the weight of the flickering shadows lingering in the air. I exhaled. The house breathed around me, slow, quiet, aware, and the stairway waited still, as patient and endless as the night itself. The room was quiet. Winter light seeped through the panes, soft and pale. I leaned against the window, letting my forehead rest on the cold glass. Then it wasn't there. Nothing. A wall of fog replaced the pane, blank and thick, pressing against my vision. I stepped back. The floor beneath my feet felt warmer somehow, almost pulsing, and the air smelled faintly of damp stone and old paper. My reflection was gone. The glass that should have held me vanished, and I felt the room ripple like it was breathing slowly, watching. A static hummed in my ears, quiet, almost friendly, and then shifted into something tighter, sharper, a pull at the edges of my mind. I reached out. Fingers brushed the fog, and the cold weight of it pressed back, unyielding. I could see nothing beyond the mist. No trees, no sky, just endless gray, curling and folding like smoke in a frozen room. Panic began to creep in, low and measured, and yet all lingered, cold and bright in my chest. The room itself felt fluid, stretching, bending without sound. I traced the wall with my hand. It wavered under my fingers, soft, almost like skin, almost alive. The candle flickered nearby. Shadows bent toward the fog, and the hum of the empty room rose and fell with my breath. I stepped closer. The fog thinned in places, but the reflection never returned. Only silence and the subtle scent of metal and frost. A shiver ran along my spine. The walls pulsed gently, echoing the rhythm of a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I tried to speak. No sound left my lips. Only the fog and the soft scrape of unseen movement. Time stretched. Seconds became minutes. Minutes became the weight of hours compressed into a single breath. I felt a presence, just beyond the fog, watching, patient, unmoving. I couldn't tell if it was benevolent or cruel, or if it even was at all. The candle guttered again. Shadows danced on the ceiling, and the room's edges seemed to dissolve further into the mist. I pressed my hand against where the window had been. Cold seeped into my palm, and the faintest whisper of static tickled the back of my neck. Then the fog twisted slightly, as if breathing, as if curious. I pulled away. The wall was solid again, unbroken, and my reflection returned, pale, tired, uncertain. But the feeling lingered. The room had changed. It had watched me, and I knew even as I blinked that the fog could return at any moment. I shivered, the candlelight softened, and I listened to the quiet of the room. Waiting, night fell deep. The cabin exhaled slowly, settling into its quiet rhythm. Floorboards whispered beneath invisible weight, creaking and sighing. The shadows were patient. They lingered in corners, pooling like dark water. The fog pressed close at the windows, curling around the walls. I sat by the hearth, pale light flickering across the rough wood. The air smelled faintly of damp pine and old smoke. Each breath carried the hum of the wind, soft and continuous. The room felt alive, not in a normal way, but watching, patiently, silently. I traced my fingers along the table. The surface tilted subtly under my touch, as if leaning toward me. I pulled back, startled by the faint metallic scent lingering in the air. Outside, trees shifted, but no sound reached me, only the hum of quiet pressure. And yet, I could feel it, something following. The candle flickered again. Shadows stretched across the floorboards, long and thin. They bent toward the fog, toward me, then recoiled like breath held too long. I moved to the window. The fog pressed against the glass, cool and damp. I could not see beyond it, but the weight of presence remained. A floorboard groaned upstairs. Soft, deliberate. I held my breath, tasting dust and wood in my throat. The cabin seemed to sigh with me. Every object tilted subtly, as if acknowledging my gaze. The hum grew deeper, resonating against my chest, soft but persistent. I felt the walls close in slightly, not threatening but aware. The air was thick with anticipation, heavy and cold. A shadow passed behind the curtain, or perhaps the curtain moved of its own accord. Either way, the motion left the room colder, thinner somehow. I sat back, letting my hands rest in my lap. The wind hummed through the cracks, a soft, endless whisper, and I felt alone yet observed, caught between the quiet of the cabin and the weight of something unseen. Time stretched slowly. Minutes bled into one another with no edges. The cabin slept, but not in rest. It was awake, dreaming, and I was inside its dream. The candle guttered. Shadows danced and recoiled. The fog pressed harder, curling at the edges of the windows and door frames. I drew the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The wood beneath me hummed faintly, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Outside, the wind whispered. Inside, the silence pressed close, and the feeling of being followed lingered, soft, patient, inevitable. I closed my eyes. The cabin breathed with me. The shadows leaned closer, and I waited, alone, humming in time with the quiet fear that filled the room. The room smelled faintly of wax and smoke. Night pressed against the windows, thick and restless. I struck a match, its flame trembling in my fingers. The last candle caught. The flame shivered violently. Shadows stretched and jumped along the walls, twisting in ways that made my skin crawl. I could feel it before I saw it. Something near, unseen, breathing close to the edges of the light. The air thickened, carrying a metallic tang and the faint warmth of fear. I whispered my own name, softly, a fragile thread of sound into the darkness. The candle flickered. Shadows warped. The walls seemed to lean in, heavy, patient. Every object in the cabin shifted slightly. A chair tilted toward me, then straightened. The floorboard groaned under a weight that wasn't mine. I held my breath. The hum of the wind outside pressed against my ears. Inside, silence wrapped itself around me, almost tactile, almost breathing. The flame danced again violently. Shadows collided, stretched impossibly long, then snapped back into strange angles. I sensed a presence moving in the space just beyond the candlelight. I traced the wick with my eyes, following the flicker, and felt the room pull tighter around me. The air grew colder, carried with the faint smell of damp earth and rust. I tried to tell myself I was alone, but my own heartbeat sounded foreign, echoing against the walls. A floorboard creaked softly. Then another, slowly, deliberately. The cabin seemed to breathe with intention now, drawing me into its rhythm. I whispered again, my voice thinner this time, hoping it might answer, hoping the sound would anchor me to reality. The candle guttered. A shiver ran along the walls. Shadows pressed closer, leaning, folding, stretching. I felt the edges of the room blur. Shapes at the corners of my vision shifted. Pale light pulled and recoiled. I could hear a faint rasp of air behind me. Or perhaps it was just my own breath, shivering in time with the flame. The candle trembled once more. The shadows collided into themselves, and I realized I could no longer tell where the light ended and the dark began. I sat very still. The flame flickered in protest, and the room inhaled with me. Time slowed. The wind outside hummed faintly, and the silence inside pressed heavier with each passing second. I whispered my name one last time. The candle quivered, then bowed. Shadows collapsed into the corners. The cabin exhaled. I sat, alone with the faint hum of the candle's dying light, feeling every heartbeat, every breath, every inch of unseen presence that lingered just beyond the edges of my sight. The flame trembled once more, then stilled. The room waited, and I waited with it. The room smelled faintly of damp cloth and cold wood. Sheets draped across the far corner shifted slightly, though no breeze stirred. A door hid behind them, pale in the dim light, waiting. I hesitated. Fingers brushed the fabric, tracing shadows. The air pressed heavier against my chest with every heartbeat. I turned the knob slowly. The metal was cold, slick with something that smelled faintly of iron. Silence pressed in, thick and tactile, and I could feel inside my chest. The room beyond was empty, yet the air felt crowded, dense with countless unseen eyes. They followed, they waited, patient and still. A soft rustle brushed my shoulder. I jerked, but nothing was there, just a whisper of movement, a presence I couldn't name, brushing along the edge of my skin like cold water. The candlelight flickered. Shadows stretched long, folding against walls and floorboards. Shapes that shouldn't exist hovered just out of sight. I stepped inside. Each footfall pressed into the floor as if the room breathed beneath me. The walls seemed to lean, subtle and slow, drawing me toward the center where the shadows pooled. A static hum filled the space, soft, almost a sigh, vibrating against my ribs. I realized the air itself had weight, carrying the faint smell of old smoke and rust. I froze. Something shifted behind me, closer, a pressure against my shoulder, unseen, undeniable. I wanted to turn, to see, to understand, but the impulse felt dangerous, like boundaries I had no right to cross. The candle guttered. Its light trembled, spilling across the floorboards. Shadows warped, folding in on themselves, stretching toward me, then recoiling. I whispered my own name. Softly, the sound vanished into the dark, returning only the heavier, watching silence. The door creaked faintly behind me, a soft groan, like it was breathing, or perhaps it was the house itself, shivering at my presence. The air pulsed, almost living. Floorboards hummed under invisible weight. The walls seemed to shift slightly, tilting toward me, eyes watching, always watching. I realized too late. Some doors weren't meant to be opened. Some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed. And I had stepped over them, quietly, irrevocably. I felt the space contract. The shadows pressed closer, patient and still. A cold draft brushed my neck, slow and deliberate. The room held its breath, and so did I. My own heartbeat sounded foreign, echoing through the small space, mingling with the unnameable hum that filled every corner. I could smell metal, faint and bitter in the air. The door seemed to pulse, throbbing like a heart, marking the rhythm of something unseen. I dared not touch it again. I whispered once more, hoping, pleading for any answer, and the silence responded fully, weighty and absolute. I stepped back. The shadows recoiled slightly, folding into corners that had never been there. The air thinned. The candle flame shivered violently, then settled into fragile, trembling light. The room waited, and I waited with it, feeling the last, quiet brush of unseen presence, knowing it would always remain just beyond sight.